So thank you, Greg. Also, I stand corrected in the back. The other answer of you can find it on the configuration tab is also correct. In Atlas, you could find the vocabulary version on the configuration tab. I stand corrected. Literally standing, and I've been corrected.
That would be the version of the ones you're looking at, not the latest.
Correct. Yeah, and so it's an important point. So when you're in Atlas and you're looking at the configuration tab, that's all of your CDMs. One of them will have a radio button selection that tells you like, oh, you're currently using this one for vocabulary, which means anytime you're in the vocabulary tab of Atlas and you run a query, it's using that one that was selected. So why don't we, I'll go up to, we'll blame Lee. By blame Lee, I mean we'll use Lee's environment and the public site so people could use it. I think I wrote it too, but it runs much faster on my laptop. So yeah, we all need my laptop. So if I run Heart as a search, I actually don't have to run it at all, but let's go to the configuration tab. What you'll see here is in the public demonstration version of Atlas, it has a web API that has been configured with 3 sources. You have a SimPuff 1%, a SimPuff 1K, and a Laertes dataset. We won't even get into Laertes. But you could see here that the vocabulary version is listed for each of the CDMs. Right? This is because each CDM, as we learned this morning, should have the vocabulary tables loaded inside of it. Right? And what this shows you is that the version of the vocabulary is specific to a CDM, and here you can see exactly which version is in which CDM. As well as with this radio button, you're able to change the way Atlas behaves when you're doing your searches so you can determine which vocabulary you want to run your search against. I was going to do this in the opposite order, but since we're talking so much about the vocabulary and searching right now, I'll show my flexibility. And I'm going to run over to the second demo first, and then we'll do the first demo second. Okay? All right. No, I explicitly want to leave that dev window open. Yeah, but thank you. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a dive into coding in the OHDSI architecture, where we essentially touch all the pieces, make a big mess, but introduce a new feature which has not yet been released to the community, but you will be the first group to see a demonstration of it, and then you'll be the first to know about it once it comes out as to what it is we're doing. So what we're looking at here is a local build of Atlas on my laptop, and it is running off of a local build of Web API running on my laptop. And it is pointing at a Postgres instance that has been loaded with patient data and a vocabulary running inside of a Docker image on my laptop. Okay, so we have all that fun stuff going on. And to walk through the as-is situation. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any way to make that a little clearer? Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, what's up there? It's really not meaningful.
It's just very hard to
So,
read anything.
so what we're looking at is a search result, but I promise you're not going to care what it says too much.
And that can be anything.
Let me see. I think this. No? Maybe this? No. I'm trying. Control Shift plus? Command Shift plus? Yay. Okay. Any better or more?
Maybe one more.
I did 2 more just because I care. Actually, that was a bad example. All right. Sure. Let's back off one. Will it, please? Yeah. Okay. There it goes. So for those who don't know, because like my laptop wouldn't project, we're working off of a screen share, so it's like going over the wireless network. So every time I click, I have to wait like 8 seconds to see it. So as I screw this up, which I will, just please bear with me. So what we're looking at in Atlas here is a basic concept search. So for those who don't know, you come in, you go to the vocabulary tab, you type in a search, and in this case, I searched for the term heart, and 3,600 results were returned, similar to what you saw in Athena in terms of just simply browsing the vocabulary and the concepts that are in it. Okay, there's tons more we could go into with that, but today what we're going to do is we're going to write some code because I keep getting complaints that the vocabulary search is too slow. Now, the vocabulary search was slow for two reasons, both of which I'll jump into. The first reason was because of this RC-DRC column. Okay, so what are those? Well, the way Atlas is set up is it actually, when you search for the word heart, it does two things. The first thing it does is it queries the vocabulary table, or sorry, the concept table in the vocabulary schema for any concept name, concept ID, or concept code that matches your search string. Okay, so you could type in a concept ID, or you could type in an ICD-9 code, or you could type in some free text, and it's going to try to find all the concepts that match. So that's the first thing that it does, and in general it took like 7 or 8 seconds. Then the second thing it does is it queries the currently selected CDM for the number of times that that concept is used or occurs within your database. What this lets you do is see, not only am I interested in this concept, say cardiomyopathy, but I also could see that there are 37,000 times that concept occurs within my CDM. That data actually comes out of the Achilles results table. Right? So again, we're leveraging a prior statistic at a database level characterization that was performed to inform the user as they're browsing the vocabulary to not necessarily worry too much if you're browsing through and you're debating whether or not to include one of two different concepts, if it is the case that one of them just never occurs. So there's less debate that has to happen, and it also just helps you pick which one you want. Let's say you're trying to find 80,000 patients and you're looking at a concept that has 4.9 million, you can suddenly say, oh wait, you know what, I'm going to use a more specific concept to narrow down my focus. So that's the second thing it would do, right? So query for the concepts, marry that together with the results from the Achilles table, provide that back in a single display so you could sort by how many records there are in the database as well as just by looking at the concepts. Now that second part that did the counting would take an indeterminate amount of time. In fact, sometimes it would take so long in the cases where so if your search returned 10,000 concepts, the construction in the building and then the execution of the query that's like, give me the count where the concept ID is in this list of 10,000 concepts IDs. That could take about 90 seconds to 2 minutes, for example. And what we did with the front end was we said, hey, if it goes over like 30 seconds, let's just time it out and put timeout in the column instead of making people wait. And ultimately what happened was people were like, when did you add the feature that broke the counts and make it only say timeout? Which wasn't what we did, but I guess my cardiomyopathy example that I use all the time just returned too quickly for me to really notice that timeouts were very prevalent, and they happened all the time. In this case, what we're looking at right now, we don't have counts, so we're not experiencing that pain, but take my word for it, you would basically just see timeout all the time. So not so long ago, around the time of the Atlanta hackathon, I was bored in my hackathon group, and I was getting yelled at again because the search was too slow as people were trying to explore the vocabulary. So I said, well, the real problem is these record counts. So I wrote a caching service and integrated it as part of the web API, and that showed up in like 2.1. What that meant was that the query for your concepts returned in like 8 seconds, and then the response for the count was sub-second. It would return in like 50 milliseconds or something. To which people said, why is the search so slow? Well, it came down from a minute, but now it was still 8 seconds, and instead of timeouts, the numbers were always there, but people still weren't happy. So that takes us to the programming example that I devised for us today, and I'll walk us through, which is how do we actually improve the performance of the vocabulary search experience for just returning your list of concepts that match your search term. Now we'll go back to why I had the tools open, and we'll go through a little bit of debugging. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a perspective as to what you might do if you were interested in doing contributions to these tools. So first I'm looking at Atlas, and I've been told about a bug. That bug and or performance concern is the speed of the vocabulary search. So in Chrome, what I'm going to do, and actually if I remember right, this over here zooms too. It does.
You're talking about the warming process? Is that
Actually, I didn't use a warming process, but I won't give it away. Not yet. I did something else. We do a warming process for the record counts. When Web API starts, it loads a cache, or warms for those people who may not know it that way. It loads a cache of all the record counts across all the data sources. It's not that big in memory, and it makes all of our record count stuff sub-second, so it was worth it. We think it was worth it. So what we could see here, if I go and do a refresh on this page, in the developer tools, this is just Chrome, we're not cool. Chrome's cool in this case. What Chrome is doing in the developer console is it actually draws out for us everything that's going on as part of loading our web page. And you could see under this All tab, I guess if I click here, there's a bunch of resources that get pulled, lots of stuff. I don't want to spend time on all of it. I just kind of want to focus everybody's attention into one thing, which is the interaction with the web API. So to kind of filter that down, there's this thing called an XHR, which is essentially what happens when we make an AJAX request or an asynchronous request from the web to the web service. And when we do that, we could see each of these XHR request types have timings and status results. So the one I'm going to focus your attention to here is this one that says heart. Can you see that okay? Pretty good. All right. So you'll see that heart took 4 seconds. Not the 8 I promised, but 4. And then the concept count took 37 milliseconds. So this is that optimization that I added from Atlanta. We went from timeouts and 90 plus seconds to 37 milliseconds now for accounts. Awesome. But still people rightfully complained that the rest of the search was too slow. So what I'm doing right now is I'm running off a version of the web API locally and that whole request. So it would probably be even a little slower if you were dealing with making a call to the remote web API up on the infrastructure, especially the one that Lee maintains, because that's slow. All right, so I kid, we love Lee. All right, so suddenly all of my Odyssey and architecture is going to just disappear one day. He's going to be like, I don't know what happened, but it was slow. All right, so let's jump over now to the web API itself. Is this part clear what we're doing? We're making a query from the web app. It's going against the web service. We don't like it. It's too slow. Okay. So my development environment that I use when I'm doing work on the web API is NetBeans. So what I have here is a branch that I've been working on. It is, in particular, the vocabulary service that I've been working on. And I'm going to show you what I have attempted to do to resolve the issue with the performance of the search. Okay, so this, and this may be getting small again, I apologize. This call here is the REST endpoint that gets hit when somebody makes a basic search against the web API for vocabulary. And the way this is implemented in the existing version, if I scroll through, again, now I'm watching my code over there move so I could tell when I get there. All right, it's this lower section. The top end of that if is what I've added, and this section here is what happens normally. We load a query called search.sql out of the resources of the web API. We run it through SQL render. We run that query against the CDM vocabulary schema, and we get back a list of concepts. Now, the reality here is we have very limited tools at our disposal when we're doing something like this because we support any one of 6 different relational databases underneath the covers of this. So we can't use native full text indexing of any particular relational database, and no relational database, or at least a relational database, people never got together and said, hey, let's all have a standard way that we do this for everything. So we can't rely on a relational database full text indexing service. And for those of you who do any database work, you'll know that like statements with % signs trying to do wildcard searches on text strings is not fast. In fact, to search for something like the word heart, it takes like 5 seconds. The idea was originally, and what I was asked to do at the inception of this tool, so years ago, people stressed that we should be using Lucene. And so for those who aren't familiar, Lucene is an open source Apache project that creates full text indexes. And it's great, it's good, it's open source, it's free. It made perfect sense. I had never heard of it, I hadn't worked with it, I didn't have time for it, I didn't do it. But other people said they were going to, so in my defense, I said, go ahead. Nobody did. Here we are, it's 2017. So, again, at prompting of people, they're like, we really should just be Lucene-based. And actually, Greg and his team said, you know, there's something called Solar, and this thing called Solar is actually a REST endpoint on top of Lucene, which meant, hey, I wouldn't even have to necessarily do too much integration directly to Lucene. I could call a REST endpoint from our REST endpoint in a microservice type fashion and pull back the search results that I wanted from a Lucene/Solar index and then be able to use that to power the search. So that was the idea in theory, and it made good sense in theory, and then I started to try to do it, and it still works, but it took me longer than I thought. Anyway, if I hop over to GitHub real quick, what I want to show you is that when I eventually get this all pushed out, you will see a few different things, and I hope to have collaborators on all of them. So the first piece is called Helios. Why does it want me to drop to upload my files? There we go. So the first thing I built is called Helios, and Helios is a repository that you'll find in GitHub. It is a set of Docker build commands in order to create from scratch a Lucene Solar-based image along with scripts to load content that you would download from Athena into Lucene, build a full text based off of that with the configuration and schemas required for that data model. I don't believe that it's the perfect schema configuration. I don't load relationships into the Lucene index right now, so there's definitely room for improvement just with Helios. But the idea is, as I go to deploy this, what this will mean is, if you have Solar with this index built in your location, then you could go into the web API, you could flip a flag before you do your builds, back to this build thing, and tell it Solar is enabled, tell it where your Solar instance is, and it will allow you to use Solar for your text queries, for your search. And I didn't want to say, figure out the Solar indexing part on your own. So Helios is an attempt to say, here's a way that we as a community can have a standard approach to build a Docker image that will be configured in order to appropriately load with all the ODBC capabilities that Lucene has and the schemas and stuff required for Solar to parse our vocabulary tables, build an index, and then make it available. Okay? So that's what Helios is, and you could get that today. That's out there. It is not integrated into the current build of Web API yet, so if you grab it, you'd also want to grab off the, there's going to be a Helios branch on on Web API, at least for now, until I get it pushed into master. All right, so what did we do? I'll try to show you here using KiteMatic, which is a UI for the Docker instances I have running on my local machine. Is that really how big it is right now? Okay, no, just loading up. There is a Solar instance, which is the output of Helios. So this Docker image is built when you run the scripts in that Helios repo. So you could see the Solar interface is over here. You're not going to get into too much of Solar, but basically you load that up, you tell it to process the Solar core, as it's called, and then you actually have your index built. All right, so how do we integrate that then into the web API? I have a portable mic. I'm going to walk over here and do it so it's not 8-second laggy. Okay, so what you should be able to see here on the screen in a minute is in my code, I've created a simple logic branch here where I'm saying if, right now it says if false, which is not as useful as if something else. Say if Solar enabled, I think that's my parameter. Yeah, so I'm loading from the configuration. If Solar is enabled, I want it to behave differently. What this means is that we won't break anybody's environment. We won't require anybody have Solar. If you don't, it'll continue to operate in the way it does today. You'll have record count caching, so that'll be fast, but you won't have the Solar improvements for the search performance. But if you do, then this little other section will fire, and without getting into too much detail on it, you can see that it actually goes about the process of creating a REST template, calling the Solar URL that's configured in the underlying API, converting the results of that query against Solar to the same concept model with unpublished specification for a concept model that we have, and return that as an array of those concepts, which is what we got back in the Atlas interface to begin with. So now I'm worried because it thinks it's stopped running, but I know I was just running it, so I don't know why it thinks it's not running. And I'm going to bet it's because Atlas, the web API crashed when my laptop didn't behave, and now it's going to think port 80 is already in process or something. So I'm rebuilding web API, and I'm anticipating being disappointed. Oh, you don't. No, you don't have to recompile web API. It is already a flag in the settings file. I just have to recompile it because I had it turned off, and I didn't go edit I wanted to show the code change because that would be cool, right? Except for this part where it doesn't work. No, yeah, the problem is that it's trying to get port 80, and it can't, because port 80 is currently in use. So let's prove that. So if we go back to Atlas, what we'll see that's the public one on lightning fast hardware that Lee provides. And here's my local one. So if I run this, you'll see that heart is pending, and then I bet you it comes back. And so that means that web API is currently running. I don't want it to be running. So if I launch the activity monitor, this is real debugging now. Let's see if we can't kill Java. It's been running for an hour. seems like too much. I bet you that one of these Java instances, too, is NetBeans. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, totally. We have a 50-50 chance. Who wants to talk about what that looks like? We have statistics people here, right? How do you kill this stupid process? Hit delete. Quit. Launch D. That sounds like it would be something. Force it. Go away. Okay, it died. NetBeans looks like it's still there. Was that the web API? If it was, we'll learn something else that somebody asked earlier today. It wasn't. All right, let's kill the other Java instance. Nah, what could I possibly have done useful in my code? NetBeans is still there. Try to load this again. Ah, yay. All right, we killed it. Yay. All right, good job. All right, nice job. All right, so here you see what happens if your Atlas instance is up and running and your web API is not configured properly. You will get this, which is your error message telling you that it can't connect to the web API. Cool. All right, we might just have saved our demo as long as NetBeans is still here. So one more time, I'm going to try to restart the API. And now port 8080 should be available. It should be happy. And so our API started up in 11 seconds. Not great, not bad, but now our API is running with Solr enabled. So I don't know why I tried to go back to that laptop. Didn't need to do that. If I come back in here, I should now be able to do my search, and this heart thing that was taking 5 to 8 seconds should no longer take 5 to 8 seconds. All right, so that took 3 seconds, but that was the first access of the Solr thing, so Solr just started up. And if we try that again, heart took 2.5 seconds. That's still not great. I wonder if I saved my Solr change. Okay, there it is. So now we're at 400 milliseconds. So that's leveraging Solr underneath the covers instead of going up against the backend database. I guess when I restarted, Solr and everybody had to go back. In any event, this is the addition that Helios will bring, is allowing us two things. One, we have adding Solr into the architecture in a way that's going to allow us to do full text search. Today, and all I've shown right now, and all I've implemented to this point, is performing that full text search against the concepts in the vocabulary. After I did this, people brought up like, hey, could you make this so it would search against the cohort definition names too? Or it would search against the population level effect estimation descriptions too? And the answer is, once we have a full text indexing capability, we could extend it to do whatever. It's not any of my #1 priorities, but at the least, once this vocabulary piece is in place and we have Solr added to the architecture in a way that people could adopt it easily without too much setup frustration, we'll have a way to continue to leverage that as a technology. And the other thing here is that in the way you saw it was implemented, I'm able to call to a API service through the API service, with the intent being that we shouldn't be trying to reinvent the wheel each time we develop some new capability. If there is something out there like a full text indexing service that we want to add, or any other service that we believe could be helpful, this will provide kind of a little bit of a path as to how to do that within the existing architecture. All right, any questions about Helios or changing the web API, or how this all impacted the front end? And notably, the front end doesn't change at all, because Atlas is still talking to the same search endpoint. It's just the web API knows that if Solr is there, it'll use that instead of using the SQL query. So Atlas doesn't even know. Any other interfaces that are out there that use this vocab API won't have to change either. No questions? We're all good? All right. All right, so that was Helios and Solar. And the thing that, as I described it as I started, that is a change in the code that touched a bunch of layers, right? We introduced a new service as a new Docker container. We introduced a new configuration to the web API. We changed code in the web API to modify the way a route ran, and that all impacted the way the experience on the website integrated into Atlas performed. So I wanted to at least have one example of that so you could see how you might think through an issue or a feature that you have interest in contributing to the broader architecture and how you might address it looking at all of the pieces. But I also wanted to try to provide a quick view of what if I'm not interested in accessing the entire web API, changing code there, adding services. What if I just want to do analysis of the existing data in my CDM and then share that with the community? So what I'm showing here is a data print. So some of you might have seen the poster that myself and Laura Hester and Jill Harden worked on, which was this visualization. The intent of the visualization is to provide a kind of at-a-glance view of a complete network of CDM databases, and to do so in a way that you could get some basic stratification statistics at a glance. So what we're doing here is we're creating a visualization where the little minutia, as we call them, or each individual little plot represents the blue section is men, the orange is women. Going up from the bottom to the top of any of the individual scales is age 0 to 100. And then going across in the view you have here, you have a series of domains. So you can see all the conditions, all the deaths, and so on. So all we're showing is the content of a CDM broken out by domain table with a distribution of age and gender. So some quick takeaways. This column here is notes. You could see in the Janssen environment we have no notes, no full text notes in any of our data sources, just a limitation of what we have. You could see these blanks here in our data set from France where we don't have any death data. We also don't have death data in NHANES. We don't have device exposure information in our data set from Japan or in NHANES, and so on. The focus isn't on data print here. I just wanted to show an example of a type of analysis you could do and then focus a little bit on a way you might contribute something like this to the overall community. So how did we do it? What we have no, not Adam, R. Okay, so that entire visualization is written in D3 in web technology, and that's all I'll say about that today unless people really want to talk more about it. But what we do is we generate a JSON document. The JSON document is a data print, as we call it. That is all of the information required to render one row of that data print visualization. It is my desire that every group we work with, especially those that have unique data sets to them, grab this package once we open source it, run the R package that generates your data print file, and then shares it. I'd like to see us create odyssey.org/dataprint, where we'll have all the data prints for all the different contributors and data holders within Odyssey, all in one big visual like what we had on that poster and what I was just showing you on the screen. I think it would be a neat visualization, a fun way to be able to see everything that we have, and a fun way to be able to do some simple comparisons across the data sources we have without exposing too much information. You don't expose conditions or drugs or diseases, anything like that. All you're showing is we've got 50 million records in this table. Okay, so this would be the file that we would share. So simply, we could exchange and store in GitHub or somewhere else a set of JSON files that could be versioned that contain all the information required to actually visualize the data print. So the encouragement has been to allow people to add whatever analysis they would like to add into the Odyssey community. So we did this to create this data print, but you may have your own idea about a type of analysis that you want to do, and hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of how you would do it. So we wrote a method in R called generateDataPrint. We pass it a caption, which is the name of the data source, a qualifier for what schema contains our CDM, and the connection details, which is the username, password, and connection string to the database, which I'm going to do my best not to show up on the screen. And then going through that list of queries that we have for each database domain table. So you can see we generate a minutia, as this function is called, for observation periods, condition occurrence, drug exposure, procedure occurrence, and so on. Each of those is a little R object that we're generating through this generate minutia function. It runs this query, and in doing so, it leverages the other packages that are used within the Odyssey community. So you see here we're using SQL render. That's an R package that translates the SQL to our specific dialect. Excuse me. So I render the SQL. I then use database connector to connect to the database, run the query, and get the result. I collect all the stats, and then notably, I run my statistics in R as opposed to trying to offload them into the database engine. So I'm going to use basic statistics functions for calculating interquartile ranges and doing that within the R environment. Doing group bys, using the deploy package, and eventually I spit this all out to JSON. Eventually I spit this all out to JSON as soon as it lets me go down to the end. Okay, so I'm writing the JSON out, and then I'm able to produce this JSON file, which I then load to a website which generates my data print. So this has been a very quick look at it, but hopefully what becomes obvious is that you don't have to get into as much detail as what I did earlier with the Helios example if you want to make a contribution to the Odyssey community in terms of the software architecture. You can get involved to the point of introducing a new service, customizing the API, changing the behavior of Atlas, changing feature functionality there. That's fine. You could do something like what we saw with Arachne, where you develop a complete standalone application that leverages the API to add different features and not change the way Atlas perhaps works, but just take advantage of what some of the other services provide in an effort to make your own application. Or you could just get involved and write a cool analysis, any kind of a piece of work that you are interested from a research perspective, and then share that as a combination of an R script, data standard formats, or visualization techniques in a way that doesn't impact the whole architecture, but can be as small as just a simple analytic written quickly in R. Any questions about data print, Helios, or general development? Yes?
For the general development, I'm going to give an example. Eric was talked about comparison between ETL and ETL.
Mm-hmm.
I have a script that I collect statistics about, we did an ETL, I save it somewhere, and then the next time I do an ETL, the same underlying source data, I save those stats again, and then the script will go and look and say, okay, well, the number of rows went up, 1%, 2%, everything that I expect to see, the rows go up 20%, or if they go down 10%, I have a problem. If I wanted to share that, is it good enough as a script that runs on Redshift and just put it out there somewhere, or is it, well, if you should make it an R package and have it, with OHDSI SQL so that it can go through render? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. So what I would say is this. A lot of it depends on everyone's skill set. Like, I can't do statistics very well. Like, I'm not a statistician. I'm a computer scientist by training. I know what I've learned and what Martine's packages let me do. So often what I will do is I'll say, like, hey, I could write this and it gets to here, but how would I actually do this in R? Because my R is not even that great. So if you have a series of SQL queries and you only know how to write those in the dialect of your existing environment, but the result of it is useful, or you believe it will be useful to the community, then my suggestion is share that either in a GitHub repo or post it to the forums and say, hey, here's something that's cool, here's what it does. I'd like to see this make it to wherever. An R package, I want it to be an Atlas, I want it to run into the web API, whatever. If you have the ability to say, here's a SQL query that I have that I think is useful, I know how to convert that to AutoSQL, I will publish the AutoSQL version of it. Even better. If you're able to then say, I'll take that AutoSQL, put it into the installation folder of an R package, write the R package that depends on SQL render and database connector, and turn it into an R package, even better, right? So I really do believe that anybody, as you're doing work, a lot of times, like I mentioned this morning, the challenge you're facing is not unique to you. And so by sharing the solutions you come up with that make your work easier, even in a state where it could just be like, here's a query on Oracle and that's all it is, yeah, it's absolutely still worth sharing. So share that, and just about everything I've seen shared like that makes its way somewhere. Somebody picks it up and adds it to Achilles as a test. Somebody picks it up and turns it into an R package, all the way through to somebody, turns like incidence rates into an Atlas feature, prediction models into an Atlas feature. And especially as the community gets visibility to what you did and understands the value of it, you may see, people run with it. And so absolutely, even if it's a germ of an idea, throw it out there and it's worthwhile.
I would also say, if you've got something useful and you're not sure quite how to move forward with it, you could bring it to the architecture call, you could put it on the forum. If it's really cool, you could sign up for the regular weekly Odyssey call that has the whole community and give a presentation. And, if people like it, invite, see who's interested enough to get the help to take the next step.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maura is always asking during the Odyssey calls. For those of you who aren't on our Tuesday full Odyssey community calls, we have that call in addition to the every other Thursday architecture call. But almost every meeting, Maura says, anybody would like to present on an upcoming meeting, please let me know. And too often it's quiet. Maura works way too hard to organize everything for us to be quiet. So.
In that regard, I would have a question, maybe just to you. I do ETLs, right?
Yep.
And there's very little talk about it, because it's always who published the study, who did this, who did that. Here's a new tool that allows you to do these things. How interested would people be in, here's what we do for ETL. Here's a case history of the pain of doing an ETL or something like that. I don't know how.
Personal opinion is people would be very interested. Just from, Erica Voss, you mentioned, and other people on the teams who've done ETLs and published stuff out to the GitHub repos about their ETLs, get questions all the time, usually through email. Hey, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that. I know after they did their vocabulary presentation, same thing, we're trying to do this. In the halls, I've been asked, we're trying to set up our CDM, how do we do our ETL? I think the more information we have out there about the process of converting a data set from a source system to a CDM, what that ETL took, the best practices that came out of it, The more that we have out there of that, the better. Because I still hear misconceptions about that process from people, and to me that just means we're not doing a good enough job of telling the actual story of it. So, you know, you hear an anecdote about something and suddenly, like, that's it. So where's our current Odyssey community call recording where somebody is illustrating, you know, a story of a CDM implementation? I don't know that we have one. So I think it would be really valuable. Absolutely. Yeah, I caution people or I suggest people not be cautious about stepping up on those Odyssey calls and saying, hey, I'd like to present something, right? Because too often we have nothing in that slot, and people are sitting there going like, oh, I did something, but it's not that cool. It's this little thing. But to everyone else, you know, it might have been easy, but it might have only been easy for you. And for the rest of the community, it might be very insightful. So it's always worth just sharing it. And if we hate it, we'll tell you.
So I'm curious because, you know, a lot of people spend a lot of agony doing ETL stuff. And, you know, when they're going through it, they want help, and probably nobody wants to think about it when they're not doing it. But there's no current ETL working group. There was a CMS ETL working group. But the Themis?
Themis is going to be the group.
Right, so they're going to cover a lot of those issues, but also the CDM and vocabulary development working group. I don't know if ETL by itself needs a working group that's not trying to solve all the problems of the world.
The CDM and Themis is, I think, going to really be sort of giving the guidance for all those sort of, not the ETL, how you wrote the code, but certainly more the specification. How are we going to handle the fact that we have, this person has allergies? You know, there are codes that says I have an allergy to penicillin, or there's also a code that says I have a drug allergy, and then lower in the observation table you can say to penicillin.
So they're dealing with the really hard kind of mapping issues and vocabulary issues. But what about what you're bringing up, where the issue is, I've done something useful, I want to save other people the trouble, I don't want to, like, you know, force my semantic idea down their throats, I just want to save them some work.
I think, like I said, I would post it on the CDM. That's where I think it's been pretty well there. But maybe you're right, maybe the ETL is more important.
I think it might be. I think we might need to. I mean, I'm not going to do it because I don't have to do ETL. But
yeah.
Yeah, it's. I think that the most important thing is that people have visibility to the challenges and solutions we each come up with, and that we don't hesitate to share when we can. So whether it's on a community call or a forum post or a GitHub repo, as part of a working group or as a suggestion for a new working group, I would just say bring it forward, and when it gets traction, it'll kind of fall into the right place. If it gets traction.
I'm thinking about my merged action table I talked about, which I posted. Have to do a little bit of responding to that a year ago or a year and a half ago. I was so it was a good idea. We didn't go any further.
Well, now that we know Lee thinks it's a good idea, we're all on board.
There's a difference between the technical aspects of it and the business rules. So I think in this it's really important that you're standardizing the business rules that we can all agree on. And then the technical piece of that is a smaller group, and it's not going to be generic across all data sets ever, and it's not going to be implementable ever.
I don't think it is a smaller group because everybody has to go through it. So, I mean, they don't have to go through it all the time, but certain people are going through it a lot. And
I think everyone's going to want to see the famous outcome of the business rules because that's important for everybody who's going to do ETL.
but people are going to have to keep doing ETL before Themis finishes.
Much larger data sets and where technology has a bigger part to play. I mean, that's the small. That's my opinion.
I'll repeat my opinion from yesterday's panel on ETLs, which is I think as a community, we need to push upstream back to the data vendors to have them sell us their data in the CDM format and be transparent about the way the business rules and the way in which they do their conversion from whatever their native format is into the CDM. Because right now, what's happening is, right, if you have if you have, X number of commercial organizations and X number of academic institutions that are all using some of these licensed data sets, we are all expending resources on ETLs. It is true that Jensen has posted our ETLs, but not everyone is in a position to just grab that code and run it. So people are having to do their own ETLs, not only design them, implement them, test them, but also run them on a quarterly basis. Store the native files, store the new CDM files, then running Achilles. Like, it could be the case that you could go to a Truven or an Optum or whoever else, and they would just hand you the CDM 5.2 with Achilles already embedded in it. What would that save us as an industry, as a community? Sure. That would be great. We would take this whole discussion off the table and move on to other things more pertinent to actual generation of evidence. I don't think we'll get there. I don't think we'll get there in 3 years, maybe beyond that. But it would be a hell of a lot more efficient for us to all just be able to leverage the standard coming directly from the vendors.
Do you think we could maybe try to take another case like this where somebody's done some other thing and they think it might be useful to others but aren't quite sure how to proceed in sharing it with others? Like, just asking.
Oh, is there another case where somebody is hesitating to share something?
Come on, folks. If I
We
gave
can't.
you like $5 to share it,
Yeah, you have a question over there? Go ahead.
we'll take the $5.
You get the $5 though, regardless of what you say next.
No, going off the sharing thing, and I think you answered it, so I wasn't going to bring up it. When I was playing with the WebView API, people that I work with write value sets for phenotyping things.
Yeah.
And they store them in VSET, so those value sets are out there. But then they wanted to play with OHDSI stuff.
Yep.
But their value sets that they work so hard on aren't there.
Yep.
So I wrote a small code to transfer from VSEC to create concept sets. So transfers over and outputs what wasn't present.
So, I think that's...
It worked for us, we needed it.
Mhm.
What do I do with that? You all.
So we had Danielle Meeker, who had been involved. There was a lot of conversation about value sets and how to incorporate them at some point. So I could tell you that conversation's come up a bunch of time, and up until you mentioning this, I was unaware that anybody had done anything to get close to an implementation of it. So it's like the hand wave you did where you said, I have this little thing. So many times we're all like, I have this, it's not that big of a deal, but it's a big deal to people. So I think that would be a great something to contribute, no matter how small it is now, because I've had and heard conversations about trying to integrate those quality measures and VSETs and things into how we work within OMOP, and I haven't seen us make progress. So apparently you're the one who's made the progress. We just need to try to get it to the community.
Well, fair enough, and certainly could do that. I mean, the value sets are becoming concept sets. I don't know if they're legit. I'm still new to all this.
And we haven't published the spec for what a concept set is, but that's my fault.
Yeah, well, I made a container and what anyway, but where would that go? How do I know? Do I post it up on the side? Do I make it part of the web API as part of the service? Because you send it to value set void, and it goes off to VSAC, grabs all the concepts, and then it looks in your repository, in your OHDSI, to see if it exists, and then creates.
So like the closest feature I could think of that sounds similar to that is a feature that was built around concept sets for negative controls, where given a concept set, it'll go and query another web service, which is in Laertes for evidence, find drugs that would be negative controls, and then return those lists back, and then map them to concepts. So it's very similar, but using a completely different service and backend. And that is in Web API. So Web API could in fact be a place for that to happen. So within Atlas, there's a list of concept sets. It could be the case that in that list there are value set identified concept sets that somebody could say like, oh, I want to import that from a value set from somewhere else and pull it in. Something like that might work well.
Maybe, but Lee, why don't you, what if this is a broad services
Just have a separate Docker container and
Yeah.
function runs in there and then you just.
Like if this is something that somebody else would want to use, and Lee wants people to start using his thing, and he's got a way of hosting it.
But I think the bigger question is like, how do you start? Right? Like, where do you start? And I think that's the link that we need to put in place. Like, it's luckily we're talking about it today, so somebody asked a question, right? But in general, the practice should be if you've got something that you'd like to contribute, or you're looking for something, and I think you should start by asking, is there anything I can reuse? If not, can I contribute? And then the same discussion could be taken place in forums or in architecture groups. And that's what probably we're talking about today. So at what point do you engage? At what point do you say, where do I put the thing? Right? So, because
Yeah, so if you have an idea for something you want to do, I say engage really early, because I've seen contributions from the community fall over in the past due to frustration, where what happens is somebody has an idea and they don't want to bother anybody, so they go and start doing work on it, and they get far down the path, and they get to a point, and then they say, okay, cool, how do I get this in there? And you're like, throw away everything you've done and start over, because X, Y, and Z. And so in order for us to kind of dovetail things together as we move forward, I think it takes a little bit of like, you know, I think I'm very accessible, like people will ping me on Skype and I may not get back to you for 6 hours, but that's just because there's a queue of people before you. But if you're like, hey, it's a Sunday and I want to talk about Web API, I'm always there, like, sure, yeah, let's talk about it. And if you have a feature idea, I really prefer hearing from people as early as possible, because I could tell you, oh, somebody's also working on that, join them. I've never heard of this before, this is a great idea, here's my suggestion. I've heard of this before and it always fails, here's why. You know, there isn't enough documentation of the failures and efforts of people in the past, but those are the types of things that we could really learn from. So just my perspective, and based on my willingness to be a part of early conversations, reach out directly to me, post it on the forum, talk about it on an architecture call, talk about it on a community call, post it on GitHub, say something on Slack. I'm not the person who says the only way you get my attention if you go through one of those channels. You know, and some organizations prefer, like, the only way to have anything looked at is if you go through here. Any of those ways, we have to be way more flexible in the way we communicate with each other. So I'm open to any of those paths for idea sharing, collaboration, and then trying to figure out exactly how to move forward to make it something that more formally enters the architecture or the tools, or just gets out to the community for more visibility. Any other questions? We're at 3:30, which according to the schedule says we will be taking a 15-minute break. After our 15-minute break, we have a few more topics, and then we'll be wrapping up for the day. So thanks again for your attention, and we'll see you all after the break.